Kia ora e hoa. Haere mai. Come and join me. I've got something a little different for us today. Instead of a picture book, I've got a junior novel. It's in the Elemental Heroes series. It's the first book. It's Hydrogen Showdown, and it's written by Chrissy Metge and McMillan. There aren't many pictures in this book, so I'm just going to read to you, and you might like to either close your eyes or just look out for the pictures. We'll put one or two of them up, okay? There's one or two pictures in the book. Are you nice and comfy, ready for something different? It's a pretty cool story. I'll find the right page and we can begin. This is chapter 1, Stepping into Elemental Land. Joey and Sophie stood and looked through the mist to the shadowy land in front of them before turning to look at each other. The twins were currently in remote Greenland, but just one small step would put them in the mysterious land of the elements. Gold, hydrogen, iron, silver, uranium, carbon, copper, mercury, sulphur, neon, and many more elements lived there. For centuries, the elements had lived in peace, in a place that humans seldom entered. But now there was unrest in their land, and it looked like the long-standing treaty between humans and elements might end. Many humans were now calling the elements elemental monsters, aware that if any of them wanted power for themselves, the human world might be destroyed. Before the treaty, there'd been wars for power to rule over the elements, and many people had died. No one wanted that to happen again. Sophie adjusted the sword and bag of supplies on her back and turned to look into her brother's brown eyes, his look reflecting her steely determination to do well in their mission. Queen Gold, the gracious ruler of elemental land, from the mystical swamp to the treacherous forest to the metallic mountains, had sent a message to the world's leaders asking for help to get to the bottom of the current unrest in their land. Of many applicants, Joey and Sophie had been chosen for this task, the future of humanity resting on their young shoulders. Joey was an expert swordsperson just like his sister, and his knowledge of science and the elements was unmatched. Sophie had great empathy and a unique ability to observe and bring about resolution. When apart, they sometimes faltered, but together, with their balancing skills, they were unstoppable. Joey looked back at his sister and gave her a cheeky smile. "We've got this, you know," he said. Sophie wasn't as confident. "Shall we enter?" she asked, fully understanding the importance of what they were about to do. Joey nodded, and in unison they took one step through the mist, and they were immediately in another world, the land where the elements lived. The air was thinner and tasted of tin. The colours of everything were denser, and the smells stronger. The twins took a few more steps, and they were now in the mystical swamp, with the jagged peaks of the metallic mountains in the far-off distance. "Unless I was looking at the map upside down, which is always possible," Joey said, with a laugh. "The Golden Palace should be halfway between here and the metallic mountains." Greenland and the human world disappeared from view. They were now in a completely different dimension that looked much like regular Earth, but was far more dangerous. "Let's get there and find Queen Gold." "Yes," said Sophie earnestly. "Let's find out what's happening and get to the bottom of this trouble." As she spoke, there was a sudden explosion near them, a flash of light and sound, and then another explosion even closer. "Far out! They know we are here already," groaned Joey, pulling his sword from the sheath on his back and holding it in front of him. He pulled Sophie behind him, and she also drew her sword. They had expected hostility, but not as soon as this. The twins glanced at each other again and began to run. The very fate of humanity was in their hands, and they weren't going to fail in their mission, despite the odds they might face. Wow. That was chapter 1. Should we have chapter 2 as well? I won't read the whole book, but maybe another chapter would be good, wouldn't it? Okay. Are you still comfy? It's starting to get exciting. Chapter 2, an encounter with the hydrogens. The boggy ground of the mystical swamp slowed the twins down as they ran, trying to avoid the wettest parts of the lowlands, the major hazard being that they might trip over grasses or reeds or run into a group of sulphurs who lived in this region. Joey had studied the map carefully before their trip, and while the mystical swamp seemed endless, he knew that if they kept going, they would eventually reach the gentle grassy pastures that led to the Golden Palace. Another explosion sounded nearby, and he turned to glance at his twin who was running behind him, her long chestnut hair flying in the breeze, her hazel eyes determined and full of life. They had trained hard for this mission, but Joey could still feel his breathing becoming difficult as they ran. The air was so much thinner than in the human world, and he could feel all his muscles aching with effort. He could see the promised green pastures ahead when there were more explosions around them and a blinding series of lights, and he heard Sophie scream. Joey turned and could make out, through the blaze of lights, Sophie plummeting to the ground, her sword falling out of her hand, and then he was falling as well. He hit the marshy ground with a thud, and before he could react, he found himself being tied firmly by some vines. Sophie was soon seated nearby in the same position. Joey did a quick scan. Their swords, while out of reach, were nearby. "What have we here?" said a high voice as half a dozen creatures emerged from the swamp, peering at the twins. Joey recognised them immediately and realised he and Sophie had had the rotten luck of being captured by a group of hydrogens. In the human world, hydrogen is the lightest element, colourless, odourless, and tasteless. In the elemental world, the hydrogens were a see-through bluish-grey colour, with wild hair and slightly vacant expressions, and they had a smoky, peppery smell. In both worlds, they were the simplest of elements and highly combustible. "What odd-looking creatures," said one of the hydrogens, looking more closely at Joey and then at Sophie, who stared back at the hydrogen, observing him closely. "They're human," said another high voice. "What are they doing here?" said another. "Aren't we supposed to be invading their world soon?" "Shh! You aren't supposed to tell anyone that, Harley," said the first hydrogen. "H-Boss would be furious if he heard you say that." "You don't want to get on the wrong side of H-Boss," said the second hydrogen. "Oh, Hudson, don't worry about Hydro," said Harley. "I came here to have fun, away from constant drills and Hydro telling us what to do. Anyone would think the end of the world was coming the way he goes on." Sophie's eyes widened when the hydrogen who had just spoken grinned at her like a maniac and promptly exploded in front of the twins. He blazed brightly as a shining ball of white for a moment before reappearing, looking slightly singed around the edges before fading to his regular blue-grey colour. The smell of smoky pepper lingered for a moment. "Best blow-up ever," Harley declared, as all of the hydrogens fell about, laughing. "Show off," said Hudson. "Bet I can do better than that." The hydrogen jumped into the air and blew himself up, his body lighting up like a firework in the sky. "Oh, you aren't the only one who could do that," cried Harley. grabbing another hydrogen by the hand. They laughed maniacally at each other and leapt into the air, creating an effect of a double explosion together, momentarily blinding Sophie and Joey as the mayhem around them continued. Sophie shuffled on her bottom so she could sit beside her brother. "You told me that hydrogen was mostly supposed to turn into water when it combusted," she whispered to Joey. "In our world it does," whispered back Joey, rolling his eyes. "But as you can see in elemental land, they can combust over and over, which is super annoying." The twins wriggled closer to each other, and as the hydrogens continued to blow themselves up, they sat back to back, unnoticed by the exploding hydrogens, having fun. They began to untie each other's vines. "They are simple creatures, aren't they?" noted Sophie, who had observed them carefully as was her way. "Self-absorbed, not worried about anything beyond their own wants. Look how quickly they lost interest in us." "They know how to tie knots, though," grumbled Joey, working on the vines that tied them. "But it seems to be a straightforward figure-8 knot, so all is not lost," he added with a cheeky laugh. "I'm feeling more confident about our mission seeing how simple these creatures are," said Sophie, as another hydrogen appeared near them, singed and smoky and with a goofy grin, before blowing himself up again. "Unfortunately, it's not going to be easy," said Joey, frowning. "These are only young hydrogens, so they haven't learnt self-control yet. We'll have to be careful around Hydro and the older hydrogens when we meet them." "Hydro, the hydrogen leader, or H-boss, as some of these youngsters are calling him," said Joey, still working on freeing them. "He's not simple like these young ones." Joey searched for the right word. He didn't want to scare his sister, but she needed to be aware that he would be a real threat. "He's formidable." Joey untied the rest of the vines, and with the hydrogen still laughing and blowing up around them, he hastily untied Sophie's vines. They glanced at each other. "Formidable," said Sophie, with a faint hint of a smile. "So, someone who inspires fear or respect through being impressively large, powerful, intense, or capable?" "I mean formidable in that he inspires fear by being powerful," said Joey, raising one eyebrow and succeeding in looking comical. "We will see about that," said Sophie, grinning at her twin. With an unspoken agreement, the twins got to their feet quietly, retrieved their swords, and disappeared through the mystical swamp, away from the exploding hydrogens, who were so intent on blowing themselves up that they had no idea their prisoners had gone. "Let's get to the Golden Palace pronto," said Joey. "Follow me, sis," he added with his trademark cheeky smile. And that's the end of Chapter 2. There are several more chapters here, and the story carries on getting quite exciting. 9 chapters. And then there's some fun facts in the back about iron in the real world. I think this would be a good book for you to find with your family in your local bookstore or your local library. I've got you started. Now it's up to you to find out what happens next. What do you reckon? Is that a good way to have a story? Let me know what you think. I love reading with you, and I thought this would be a good one to try. The Hydrogen Showdown. Book 1 in the Elemental Heroes series. The next book is on its way. Hey, come and join me again soon. I'll find us another good book, okay? Ka kite. Goodbye, my friend.